So I'm going to give a tour of the system setup in Eco Risk Projector. So you're going to want to start by creating a new system. So hit new and then system. Now once you're in here, you can give it a name. So I'll call this one test system. You can also give it a description. So the demo of system setup. Then you'll be greeted with this screen. So before I've created any scenarios or locations, this is what I'll see. So the first step is to create a scenario. For example, we might go ahead and create a pre-development scenario. You can give it a description as well. You can set the default or not, and you can say if you're going to use observed data. So I'll just go ahead and say that this is the default and we'll use observed data. So the default scenario is important for a couple different things. First of all, it is often used as the initial setting for stuff like the baseline scenario. It's also used for things like ARI calculations. You can choose to calculate an ARI threshold using the default data flow as opposed to the scenario that you're currently computing. And also it's used for basically the basis of pulling data. So if we have a second scenario and we don't have data for a certain data type at a location in that scenario, we'll then look back and use the default scenario's version of that data. So for example, you might upload temperature data on each location in pre-development, then you might have a full use scenario and it will automatically use the temperature data from pre-development without you having to re-upload it if the data is just going to be the same regardless. So it's to prevent having to re-upload the same file repeatedly. So we'll start with pre-development, and effectively a scenario is a water use scenario. So it's a version of data that you want to assess, and often you'll have multiple scenarios and you can assess the change between scenarios. So then we'll go ahead, we'll create a location, and now a location is basically just somewhere where you have data. So that'll almost always be a gauge, but just anywhere, any location that you have data can be a location. Go ahead and call this node 1, for example. Won't give it a gauge number for now. Now, when you want to upload data, you have two options. You can either drag and drop, manually upload a file, or you can use observed data. So for this first example, I'll just drag and drop. So if I go ahead and grab some data, so here, got some sample data, I might go ahead and say I want to upload flow 10 years, depth 10 years, and rainfall 10 years. And I can select them all and drag and drop. You can also click browse and go through your file system as well if you'd like. Then you set the data type. So we have a number of different data types available. You can see in there. Most of them are time series. You also have things like climate and bathymetry, which are not time series. In this case, we've got depth, flow, and rainfall. So the general idea would be that you upload all the data you have of all the different data types into a scenario, and then the different models which require different data types can all just be run off one base scenario. So you basically have a point of truth for data versioning, and you know that this has got the correct data on it, and then even if a model only needs flow data, it's fine. It just ignores the fact that we've got depth and rainfall as well. And then you can also run on a different model which needs depth and rainfall data. It doesn't care about flow, for example, and you can use the same system for both those. So we've gone ahead, we've created a scenario, we've created a node, we've put some data on it. Let's go ahead and create another location. For this, I'll use observed data. So for example, if I choose this 14-mile brook, I can go ahead and call it that, and I'll then grab the station number, the gauge number, which is how we know which to fetch data from. So I'll go ahead and upload that, create, and you see we've pulled the flow data here. Now we could also choose to further upload data. So I might say, hey, I still want to upload depth and rainfall data here. So I can just select those two and put them on. And then I'll say what they are. Okay, now let's say we want to create an additional scenario. So this one could be full entitlement, for example. Now we won't say there's a default, and we'll say we're not going to use observed data here. So I've created that. Now you can obviously switch which is the default anytime. Might say this is the default and now pre-development isn't. But often you'll create your first scenario, it'll be your default. That'll be where you upload most data, and you'll leave it at that. So now that I've created full entitlement, I have these same two locations, of course. Now let's say the depth and the rainfall data is going to stay the same, but it's the flow data that's different. I can then come in here and say, hey, actually, I've got to upload this different flow data, for example, and I'll upload that same flow data on both. And then we'll say that it's flow. And so now when I run the tool, I could run any plugin that needs rainfall, flow, and depth data, and it could run at both locations on both scenarios, and it will use the default data for rainfall and depth for both, for both pre-development and full entitlement scenario. So now that I've got all this, let's say I wanted to edit the name of this node. You simply right-click, edit location. You can change the name. Same thing with a scenario, right-click, edit location, or delete, same thing, delete. And then also refresh. So for any location that is using observed data, you can go ahead and refresh it by here, and this will pull the latest data. You can also refresh all locations with this button down at the bottom, and this will pull the latest data for every single location, for every single scenario that you're using observed data. Okay, now that I've set up this system, let's have a look at what the data looks like. So if I click this preview data button here, it'll pull up the preview tool. So here we're looking at the comparing locations. So basically select a scenario and view each location. We're looking at pre-development, we're looking at flow. So you can see node 1 has got that 10 years of flow data that I uploaded, and it's right at the start of this series. So in the 1980 to 1899, 1890 to 1899. Then we've got a massive gap, and then we've got this observed data, which doesn't start until, what is that? If I zoom in, I'll be able to see better. So it doesn't start till all the way over here, which is around 2008. So I can, look at this data. I can switch between linear and log scales. I can turn on and off time series. So turn that off and on. And then I can also see a magnitude duration curve. So for the node that I set in, the two locations, so node 1 and then this one, which is observed flow data. And again, linear and log scale. With these charts, you can, zoom, pan, move around, and you can also save an image of them at any time. So that'll save what you're currently viewing. Now I can look at all the different data types. So let's look at depth, for example. So here we go. We've just got some depth at the start here. So we've got, about 10 years of depth, and I uploaded the same file for both. So you can see it's the same on both. And we can then, see the rainfall data I also uploaded, I think. Yep. So it's just here. So this, linear and log. And again, it's just the same data. Now, if I go to full entitlement, I didn't upload rainfall data, you remember? I only re-uploaded the flow. So there's no need to, view. So although the computation will use the pre-development or the default scenario data to infill rainfall for, full entitlement or any other scenario, when you go to view it, it won't show you just a duplicate of the data. However, I did upload flow data. So here we go, we can see, and I uploaded the same data for both, but we've got a quite long flow time series here. You can view it linear and log scale. You can zoom. So, zoom into a shorter period, even shorter again. I can pan around, and at any point I can download an image, and this will show exactly what I was looking at there. So exactly this time series, period. Cool. So I can also compare scenarios. So this is same idea, but instead of looking for a scenario across all locations, I can look for a location across all scenarios. So here we're looking at flow in node 1. It's, there we go. So we've got a short amount at the start and much more at the end. And I think it'll probably be overlapping. Yeah, so it's the same data basically, but 10 years of it here, and then this one has full period. Anyway, there is a video showing the preview in detail if you want more information, but I think that gives a good overview. So now that I've got the system set up, I could go ahead and I could create a model. I could select this system. I could run something with it. I can refresh locations, and I can use as many models as I want based on this system, and when this system updates, the models will show that the system's changed, and so you can have one point of truth for all your data for this given system, given area. So I think that's a good tour of the system setup in Eco Risk Projector.